Hi folks, how are you doing? Let us take a look at the third game of the World Championship match being played in India between Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand. Although the game was a draw as the first two games, this was by far the most exciting game, a very thrilling one, very interesting. It lasted more than 4 hours and really it was on the verge of being the first victory. There were lots of pressure, as we will see now. Anand with black pieces equalized easily and put Carlsen under some real pressure, and the contender was on the ropes and really struggling to survive. But he finally managed to do it. But anyway, the game was amazing. Hoping to see lots of these kind of games. So as I said, Magnus was white. He keeps on playing this knight f3 move, d5, g3, g6. So far they are repeating the moves from their first game. And here Carlsen deviates, playing c4, kind of a retty move, a hyper-modern approach to the opening, inviting black either to take or to advance the pawn on d5. Sorry. Anand takes. Also, it is very normal just to advance up to d4 or play c6, defending it. There are lots of approaches here. I'm not going to see all them. Takes, and here Carlsen took for a couple of minutes and then decided to go recover it immediately, or at least it was seeming he was going to. He checks on a4, a very principled move, checking the black king and trying to recapture on the next move on c4. There are a couple of ways to block the check here. Anand went to play knight c6, very logical. Also c6 would have its own ideas, just apart from blocking the check, blocking the potential bishop on g2, as this diagonal will be very important for white. Bishop d7 was also a move, but probably following with something like queen takes c4 and bishop g7, bishop g2. This bishop on d8 couldn't go on to c6 to challenge the strong white bishop on g2. But anyway, this did not happen. The knight went to c6. The knight went to c6, and Magnus played bishop g2, threatening to move the knight to e5 and attack the black's knight on c6 with 3 pieces, with the queen, the knight from e4, and the bishop from g2. Note that the black knight is pinned, and certainly that would be very, very uncomfortable for black. So logically, Anand plays bishop g7, preventing knight e4, knight e5, controlling the e5 square. Knight c3, not taking the pawn for the time being. And here Anand plays another rather logical move, e5, taking some central control, allowing and threatening maybe to defend that pawn on c4 and be a pawn up, although it is not clear if that would be good or bad. With some moves like knight f5, knight e5 again would be possible. So bishop d7, and black's position is a little bit not that comfortable because he has not that much space, and there are some tactical possibilities with this bishop here, with some nice developed pieces. So Anand played the very logical e5 move, and to avoid this maneuver of the bishop protecting the pawn on c4, Magnus goes ahead and takes that for once. Now note that this knight must be developed before black can castle. White can castle right now, and it is very important where black is going to put his bishop. The proper square is on e7. White castles, black does so, and white plays d3, a very logical move in this kind of structures, just giving the possibility for the bishop to come out and play, and also controlling this e4 square from some advances from black side, more or less typical in this kind of English structures. This also reminds me of some Catalans, with this bishop on g2 pressing a little bit on this diagonal. And here Anand plays h6, an interesting move, protecting this g5 important square, and not letting white to put either a knight or a bishop there. That could be an interesting square. Just to see what would happen if black wouldn't have played that. Something like bishop e6, a logical move, attacking the queen. The queen could go also to a4, but then the knight would probably go to a central square and black would be at least very okay. But after something like queen h4, trying to attack here, now we see that this g5 square is important. And after something like knight a5, to prevent white from playing bishop g5 or knight g5, knight a5 attacking the queen on h4. After a trade, knight g4 is attacking the bishop on e6, and if white managed to get rid of this bishop, he will have the bishop pair and probably a better endgame. Obviously Anand didn't want to go for this kind of stuff, and after d3 he plays h6, as I said, controlling this g5 square, and bishop d2. Very normal move, just connecting the rooks and giving this bishop the possibility of playing on this diagonal later on the queen side. Something like bishop e3 was also possible, but it may fall into attacking with knight f5. Now white doesn't really want to give up the bishop pair, so bishop c5 maybe, and after rook e8, something like rook ac1, bishop e6 attacking the queen, which has only 3 squares to move into. Wouldn't be that great to put it on g4 as for some discovered attacks, so probably queen a4, and after something like queen d7 and bringing that rook to the center, it is not clear that the bishop is very well situated here, and actually black must be at least okay, because his knights are controlling some important squares. He has he has some control of the center. He has complete development, so should not be worse by any means. So bishop d2 is a very logical move here, as we saw. Here Anand went on with, which I think was the novelty of the game, knight to d4, straightforward, hadn't been played in this situation, I think. And well, here Magnus took some time for thinking. He realized that this is a very committal move, just putting the knight in the center right away. And the Indians were not that sure about this novelty, because they thought white will have some pressure with this move. Instead, something like bishop e6 and queen h4 once again. Now remember that this g5 square is protected by black, so there are no tricks here with knight g5 or bishop g5. Knight a5, take, and this endgame is roughly equal. Still very playable, but black will have no problems here. Instead of moving to h4, queen a4 is possible as well, but black could easily take some initiative with f5, knight d4 maybe, and not have any problem at all, at least. But okay, this knight d4 move was played, a very crucial point. White took, as there is no point in letting black having this really strong knight in the center. So after take, obviously black recaptures with the pawn, as taking with the queen would be disastrous. After queen takes c7, attacking the knight, attacking the pawn on b7, threatening to play bishop e3. This probably is already losing. So e takes d4, and the knight goes to e4, a very nice square in the center, controlling lots of squares. Also, white now has some pressure on this c file. The rook will probably come here, and this diagonal could be potentially very important for white. So at this point, it seemed that Magnus had some real nice chances to put pressure on black's position, and it seemed that the novelty wasn't that accurate by Anand. Here c6 is a very important move, just closing the threads we just saw on the C file and on the light square diagonal. And here Magnus took a while to think. There it is important to come up with a plan to keep pressuring here, to have something to play for, because otherwise black will develop his bishop and probably have no problems. Magnus came on with this bishop b4 check, not check, sorry, bishop b4 move, pinning the knight to the e7, pinning the knight to the rook. Well, as the game went on, maybe this wasn't the best move he had, but it's really not easy to suggest that clear moves here. Queen c1 was an interesting move suggested by an Indian GM commenting the game live. Not really remembering his name right now. The point is that you're attacking the h6 pawn, and something like knight f5 probably would have to be played to protect it, as king h7 protecting h6 leaves this f7 pawn, this f7 square, a little bit weak. And now bishop b4 pinning the knight on e7, and now rook e8 wouldn't be that great because the knight attacks both rook and f7 point from d6. Obviously there are much better alternatives in this sequence, but just to illustrate how interesting possibilities there could appear with such a at the first sight a strange move, queen c1, just bringing the queen back and disconnecting the rooks. In fact, we will see this move later, but not now, so it was not that strange, it seems. Another possibility were to bring a rook on the c file just to keep some pressure, although this c6 pawn closed it up a little bit, for the time being at least. Either this pawn or the other one, it's not clear which would be the best one, but okay. Magnus went with this bishop to b4. Now bishop e6. White has to go either to c5 or go back, and really not an easy decision to make. Finally, queen c1 was played with probably some ideas to bring the bishop back, as we saw in the previous line, to attack the h6 pawn, and maybe to try to bring the knight to c5 and attack the bishop on e6, just to, I think, just if any of the players get the bishop pair, that would be already an interesting point, an interesting advantage there. And attacking also the b7 point, the pawn on b7, which is right now not protected. But okay, there were some other moves. After queen c1, bishop d5, a very logical move, putting the bishop on a very strong square, protecting c1, being protected at the same time by the queen, the pawn, the knight, and somehow challenging this diagonal, which was controlled by this g2 bishop. An interesting line I wanted to show is that this b6 line my engine was suggesting during the game, sacrificing a pawn and showing which seems to be a complete compensation. Something like take and taking on c6. After this, rook a c8, queen goes to a4, or else rook c8, rook c7, trying to double rooks. And if white tries to challenge, just exchanging a couple of pawns. Black has the bishop pair, has the control of the c file, and white's queen on a4 doesn't seem the best piece, although he has some diagonals to play. I think black has full compensation for the pawn here. Maybe not better, but with accurate play should not be worse. Interesting line my computer was suggesting. But bishop d5, also a very logical move, a strong one. And here a4. At this point, Carlsen really wasn't looking that happy, probably realizing that something didn't go that well. Having these rooks, disconnected, this pawn putting restricting white's position so much, and having this bishop, this strong black bishop on d5, probably wasn't making him the happiest man in the world. And it took him a while to play this a4 move, probably going for some kind of minority attack, trying to create some weaknesses on the queen side. There were some other alternatives, although it is not that clear what to play here. Queen c5, maybe attacking with the obvious threat, attacking the knight on e7, but knight a5, and now it seems the queen is not that well placed. Something with base e1, rook e8, and it's not sure who is better here. Probably black is not having any problem. Other possibility maybe was to go with the bishop to d2, as we saw earlier. Now king h7, knight c5 to attack the pawn on b7. Black would exchange this bishop, and something like b6, knight b3. Black could play a5, and probably being better at this point, because once again white's development is not that good. The rooks are not connected. The queen, well, okay, this is making this better to attack h6, but it is protected by so far, and the knight doesn't look that good. So just to illustrate that it wasn't so easy to make a very good move here. So Carlsen went with this a4 idea, and b6 was absolutely correct here, as all the commentators and the engines were suggesting. Not that clear why is it the best move for me, showing that I'm not that good, but probably the point being that this pawn is a little weakness, and this bishop is not going to be that good after a move like c5, which is being threatened right now, because this pawn on d4 would be restricting white's position quite a lot. It would be protected when c5 is played, and this bishop would look really awful. A good move by Anand, b6. So that's why, with good reasons, Carlsen exchanged this bishop, which is going to be not a good piece in a couple of moves, for the knight on e7, giving black the bishop pair, but arguing that this bishop on g7 is not that good at the moment because it's staring at his own point. Also, in the future, maybe in a more open position, it could be a problem, but right now it isn't that much. But okay, at this point, probably Carlsen was realizing he wasn't better. Probably he knew that if somebody had some chances to win this game, it was black. So he played a5, just like in the second game, playing a kind of minority attack, trying to create some weaknesses to attack, trying to place for something, have some initiative on the queen side. Although black really seems solid, having bishop pair, decent central control. This bishop once again on d5 looks really great. Okay, although black seems to be somehow better, we also have seen Magnus playing these tiny little bit worse positions very precisely, and actually ending up winning lots of times. So there was a lot to be played here yet, not over at all. Here Anand played rook a b8. There were a couple of other alternatives. Of course, taking on a5 I think wouldn't be that good, because after white recaptures, although this b2 pawn is weak, a7 would be weak as well. So white could have some play, doubling rooks and queens here, trying to attack it. So something like rook a b8 was played, probably maybe x-raying the pawn on b2 and trying to put the rook on a more active file. Although we'll see that it could be also interesting to leave it on a8, because this a file will ending be very important for white to survive. An important factor in this game will be rook e1 was played, probably trying to protect this e2 pawn for the future, just making some moves. Rook fc8, bringing the other rook to a possibly open file, just x-raying the queen on c1. And after this, Magnus took on b6. Anand maybe surprisingly took with the pawn. Some people were thinking I was one of them, that Anand probably brought his rook to b8 to recapture with it and just create some pressure on the b2 pawn. But also looks good to keep the pawn structure intact, just keeping everything in order. Obviously, at this point, Anand knew he has at least an equal position, so he does not rush. He just keeps making logical moves. This bishop is very strong. The rooks are not connected so far, so black is at least okay. And he was not rushing it, letting just Magnus play and see what he got here. Magnus actually came out with an interesting move, Queen f4, having in mind to transpose into an ending which could actually be better for him if he managed to exchange queens on d6, recapture with the knight, and after the light squared bishops are exchanged, the point will be that this bishop would be a bad one because it would be staring at his pawn, and even more, if some c5 is played, he would have practically nowhere to go, and the knight would be a good one, a good knight versus a bad bishop. Adding to that, white would have the control of the only open file in the game, the A file. That would give white a very favorable endgame, actually. And well, as we saw, bishop d2, knight d2 was another idea, just trying to exchange this this strong bishop on d5, and relocating later with the knight either to c4, e4, just trying to hold everything connected. But the main point being that white would like probably to exchange the strong bishop of black on d5. But queen f4 was also very interesting. Rook d8, very logical, just trying to prevent that maneuver we just saw to exchange the queen on d6, so controlling the important square. And at this point, Magnus once again took his time to move, as well, he's a critical position. He must come up with some plan, not to end up in a very passive and tough position. Obviously, at this point, h4, something not really weakening white's position, but kind of a waiting move, just grabbing some space on the king side, maybe trying in the future to push h5 to try to generate some counterplay here on the king side. As we will see, Magnus is just pushing pawns, having nothing better to do, trying to create some activity, trying to compensate his kind of bad pieces compared to those that black has, compensate his lack of space maybe, but not committing so far his pieces to new squares, just waiting. And here, actually, just to point out that bishop e5 here was obviously not a threat, because black would be hanging the pawn on h6. And after h4, as I was saying, a very interesting move, king h7. At the first sight, it seems a strange move, not a good one. I was thinking that this could not be good, because after some eventual h5 and opening of this light square diagonal, this king seems to be under a little bit of pressure. But actually, it has some really interesting point, as now bishop e5 is an idea, and the king would be protecting h6. Another logical, the move I was thinking was the most logical, and I think it wasn't a bad one, was something like rook a8, challenging the only open file in the position. But okay, this king h7 is a very interesting move, in fact, just showing how strong these guys are, playing moves like not that easy to understand at the first sight, but a very, very interesting move, in fact. And now Magnus went to knight d2 finally, trying to exchange this strong bishop on d5, and then probably relocating the knight to c4 or either e5, and more or less trying to hold up the position. And as he knows, he's not better at all, and probably could have some problems if he's not careful enough. Here bishop e5, queen g4. Now we reach another crucial moment. At this point, a repetition of moves was possible with bishop e6, queen f3, bishop d5. This could be a forced draw, as white's king has no squares to go other than these. But kudos to Vishy, who decided to keep playing, ignoring that forced repetition, which would give him, in fact, another more or less comfortable draw with black, and that wouldn't be that bad. But he realized he could play for something, and he pushed h5. The other move that keeps playing and just makes white wonder what he's going to do. Queen h3 is the move. Now after bishop e6 we saw this queen h1 move. Now this is not something you see every day, certainly not the best square at the first side to be for the queen. Not very recommendable to do this at home, but it certainly has some little pros. After something like c5, just establishing a strong pawn chain here, at least white has the control of this light square diagonal, which is not bad at all, and he's controlling this a8 square strongly with his both queen and bishop, and also with his rook, preventing black from challenging it, and well, just having something to compensate this nice bishop pair, something this pawn majority here, which are going to start to advance, and his awkwardly placed queen on h1. At this point, something like after c5, knight e4 was played with an obvious idea to check on g5 and exchange this light square bishop. Probably were willing to end up in an endgame with opposite colored bishop, where white has more possibilities to draw the game. Another idea was that the other obvious square for the knight was c4, but after taking on c4, white's pawn structure would probably be worse, and this e2 pawn could be a really target. This d4 pawn could have some possibilities here. So Magnus wisely decides to put the knight on e4. King g7, very logical, not allowing white to check him for the time being. And now knight g5, trying to exchange this bishop for all means. At this point, well, Anand assumes that there is no real reasonable way to prevent the knight taking the bishop, so he advanced his pawn to b5, trying to create a passed pawn, and well, developing an advantage here between these pawns, trying to create a passer and force him to advance. There was not really that satisfactory way to prevent the knight from taking the bishop. Something like bishop d7, the bishop would go to d5, attacking this f7 square, the pawn, and something like bishop f5, bishop could go to e4, forcing more or less the exchange, or even something like bishop h3, and after exchange, this queen could get out of this hole of the corner, which was where she wasn't that happy. So b5, a very accurate move, and at this point e3, another crucial point. Here the engines analyzing the game went kind of mad, thinking that this was not a good move. This was kind of a mistake, maybe not a blunder, but a mistake, which was leading black to have a really huge pressure. The point of this move, probably, as far as I understand it, is trying to create some activity, probably creating more weaknesses, and forcing to lose this pawn if black wants so. But okay, it would create some activity on this file, on the E file, and just not sit there and waiting passively for this being for this pawn advancing and crushing him in the end. Well, after making this move, you could see Magnus biting his lips nervously, it is clear that he was not uh, happy at all with his play, and he was realizing he could have really some problems. D takes e3, Magnus took with the rook, and at this point bishop d4 was played. More or less surprising, as it seems that later in the press conference Anand just said that he thought that after bishop b2, rook here, white has full compensation, at least he thought so in this file, but it seems that these two pawns may be too dangerous. But okay, it's not clear at all. Not that clear, because this is very dynamic right now. White has some activity all of a sudden, and if these bishops come either to h3 or whatever, and the queen comes out of here, he could have some compensation for the pawn. So Vishy went for this other move, not taking the pawn for the time being and attacking the rook on e3. Rook e2 was played, just getting out of the threat. And okay, at this point, well, what can we say? So far we're seeing a very interesting game. There was another interesting point here. Both players had less than 20 minutes, so it was making the things even more thrilling. c4 was played, advancing pawns, logical. The b pawn is still weak, and well, black keeps advancing, just hoping for some other mistakes from white, or at least trying to not risk too much. White takes on e6. After the obvious f takes e6, there is some counterplay, as we saw on this e file. The bishop could be attacking this in a potential endgame. At this point, Magnus had really less than 10 minutes, so it was a thrilling game, kind of a rapid one. Bishop e4 was played, an interesting move, just targeting here, just letting the queen get out via this diagonal probably. And okay, just keep holding to this pawn, at least seemingly. Just note that trying to protect it in any other way is not very effective, as the pawn it seems is going to be lost anyway. Rook d1, and after black takes, white just cannot take for this discovered check. Something similar happens if rook doubling rooks here. Black would probably just take, and after taking on e6, go to c5, attacking here, and the pawn is very dangerous on the third. And something like bishop h3 would probably lead to something similar, taking on d3. And after taking, the queen would move some reasonable square, and this pawn is once again very, very dangerous. So bishop e4, reasonable, defending this pawn at the not very useful, because it's going to fall anyway for the time being. So c takes d3 and rook d2. As we saw, defending earlier with the rook wasn't possible. Now taking with the bishop couldn't be also good, because take and taking here. Although it may be not that clear, but black must be absolutely better here. C takes d3, and this interesting move, rook to d2, trying to get the pawn back in some more or less favorable conditions and hold the position for the time being. Queen b4 was played here, attacking the rook, putting some pressure on this b2 one. This b2 pawn is also, as we see, is going to fall, a very weak one. Something like rook a8 was also very interesting, just putting pressure on this f2. It is the pawn is pinned to the king, and putting pressure on f2. It's definitely a logical idea, just to illustrate something like rook a d1. Black could play just sacrificing for the time being a rook and just carrying it back, attacking once again as it is pinned. But okay, queen b4 also seems reasonable. Rook a d1, defending, and bishop takes b2. So Anand grabs another pawn, very logical. And well, once again, rook f8. At this point, putting some pressure on f2 was also possible. But here, both players, as I said, had very few minutes on the clock, especially white, Magnus. So it was logical to not to risk too much and play just simple moves, taking pawns and make white think. Queen f3 was played finally. White gets out of the corner of this horrible square for the queen, so white will probably be taking the pawn on d3 right now and without much problem, and black would be up only a pawn, the one we just took on b2. Still black has some pressure, but now it seems the position seems not to be that tough for white. Now that he has some activity, his pieces are much better than a couple of moves ago. So Magnus here has more chances to survive. Bishop f6 was played here, but it is not clear how to play better here. But it's got something like rook f8 attacking the queen. Queen probably would take on d3, bishop c3. The queen could go very active, and after keeping the rook out of these dark squares, it is not clear how he's going to black to improve his position that much. So bishop f6, it's a move. White obviously takes on d3. There is no much threat, there is no much danger for the time being, and he just have to get at least that pawn back. Some exchanges, and now suddenly, well, black is still up a pawn, but take a look at these pawns. They are both in light squares. This will be potentially be an opposite color bishop endgame. So both of these pawns will need to be protected with the king, as the knight, as the bishop on f6 will not be able to protect them, and the bishop white has will be able to attack them. So suddenly black doesn't seem to be better anymore, and is more or less forced to liquidate into a drawish endgame. These 2 points will now play a very important role and will help Carlsen to at least hold the draw. Now rook d8 doesn't seem the best move, at least the commentators were saying so, but what else can white do to keep this pawn advancing? It doesn't seem so easy, because white is controlling this b3 square quite easily. So anyway, rook d8 was played, and at this point it was clear that no much advantage for black, if there is any. He has some real weaknesses here, targets for this bishop on e4, and white's pieces are quite active, and well, Magnus should have no problem at all here. Bishop was played to d3, queen d4, bishop takes b5. Black is just giving back the pawn, realizing that he has no really, admitting he has nothing to play for a win at least, and offers to go into a drawish endgame, bishop endgame with queen f6. In fact, I think at this point Anand offered a draw verbally, but we all know Magnus. He went on playing. He's not that kind of guy who accepts draws, even if they are more or less obvious. Not really surprising. Just remember that last game he played before this match in USA, down in the Sinkfield Cup against Levon Aronian. He was under lots of pressure during all the game. He was on the verge of losing, just like in this game. Finally, Levon, I think, offered a draw. He declined it and went on to win that game. So, not really surprising that he kept on playing. Although, objectively speaking, maybe white is the only one who could play for some initiative on that or advantage here, but not really clear how could he win this end game. But anyway, he went on playing. He checked. Bishop e7, king g2. There is very little chance to have an advantage, but okay, white is the only side who can win, and Magnus keeps playing. Very typical on him. g5, trying to liquidate and simplify a little bit the position. H takes, queen takes. Now bishop c4, attacking the weak pawn on e6, and h4, trying to force the matters here on the king side. Taking advantage of this queen, attacking more or less the white king on g2. Queen c7, defending on g3, and okay, at this point the game is obviously drawn, but okay. Black plays e5. He could even have he could even give that pawn, and after exchanging the queens, he would sacrifice this bishop for the pawn, and it would be a very easy draw. But okay, players were in a mood of finishing the game almost till bare kings. So e5 was played. It seems neither player wanted to accept the obvious draw, or I don't know if even to offer it. So they went on playing until the game was over. King f3, funny move. I'm pinning the king. Queen takes, f takes, bishop c5, king e4. They were just wanted to get rid of the pawns, and they succeeded, because at this point Anand stopped the clock. Obviously there is no chance for anybody to win, as there wasn't a couple of moves ago either. So at least, well, after more than 4 hours, called some funny moves, the game is finished. But so far, I think this is the best game we have seen. I think people will not be worried if lots of these kind of draws are played, because this was very exciting, very thrilling game. Magnus will be obviously not happy, as he was under huge pressure, having white pieces, and was really near to be lost in some moments. But okay, he's a very good player. For some reason, he's the highest rated player in the history. And okay, let us see what they have prepared for us in the next games. Let's hope this fighting spirit will prevail, and we'll see more exciting chess. So that was all for today. Thanks for watching. See ya.